So who will Borthwick select in his first squad? So welcome back to BD Rugby. Today we're going to be looking at who I think Borthwick will select for that first test against Scotland on the 4th of February. Not who I would pick, but who I think Borthwick will pick based on his coaching experience, playing experience, as well as the influence of the other coaches, Nick Evans, Kevin Sinfield, Richard Cockrell. And let's not forget, Borthwick was involved with Eddie Jones in coaching for a long time. So I'm not certain the team will radically change. But I think there'll be some key positional changes based on form, availability, and the way he wants to play. So today we'll be looking at backs, and we'll do a separate video on forwards, but today on the backs. So I'm starting at 15. I think Freddie Stewart will play. The guy won all the awards last year. Probably in the last 18 months, he's probably been England's most formed player. Yes, he didn't have the best game against South Africa, but at probably of all the teams, they were probably the best team to be able to target him and just disrupt him in some way. And I don't think England at all played well in that game. And I think he was just one of, the whole collective. I think the other option is potentially Elliott Daly or Mayland. And I'll touch on one of those in a moment. I think on the other wing, I think England will look to bring in an out-and-out winger. So I think you've either got to go Hassel-Collins or Caden Murley. I think Hassel-Collins is built for Test rugby. He's a big, imposing guy. He's in form. He's a sort of player who will take the outside break, but he can also run through into traffic. When Borthwick was at Leicester, there was a lot of interest, I understand, in Hassel-Collins. Now, that may well have come from somewhere else in the club, but it's likely to have got Borthwick sign-off. So I have the impression that this guy's someone on his radar, and I fully expect him to win his first cap in the Six Nations and probably be a starter. Now, on the other wing is where I think Borthwick might look to play Elliott Daly. I know so few people clamour and say, oh no, he's a 15, oh, he's a 13. I kind of agree that actually perhaps Elliott Daly's best position previously was at 13, but he's played so much more of his career now in that back three position. And you've got to remember that he was the starting winger in most of the campaigns when Borthwick was England coach. He was also starting winger in those tests on the Lions when Borthwick was coach. It's not going to be unfamiliar for him to see Elliott Daly on the wing. And he brings a lot to the game. He's got a brilliant skill set. He's in form. And obviously, Six Nations are often won by a few points. He's got an amazing boot on him. If we need to kick it, that is just an option to have. So I fully see him being part of the squad, because if he's not playing, he'll definitely be on the bench. But I probably see him playing on the wing. And the centres is something that's always being debated at the moment. We haven't had a settled centre partnership for years. I think that from looking at outside centre, I think the two that have been selected to play there are Henry Slade and Joe Marchant, both players with slightly different skill sets, but both very skilled players in their own. I think they'll go with Henry Slade, given that coaches have always gone to him. And I think if England can unlock their backline a little bit more, I think he becomes key to that, because I think he's the player who will then bring those wider players into the position. I think he can run good lines. I think defensively he's very sound. So I think Henry Slade will play in that 13. The other person who could play in 13, who played most of his career at 13, is Tuolangi. Although looking at the composition of the squad, I wonder if he's been selected as a 12 rather than a 13. Interesting though, I think at 12, they may not go down the Manu route. Now, I don't know, I haven't really worked out how they're going to fit Manu into this, because Manu is always a player that has to be involved somehow, but I'm not exactly sure. But I think that a lot of the narrative in the last few weeks has been around Dan Kelly. Him being a defensive leader, a glue player, very key to that Leicester leadership. And I think that, Jones experimented with him in that summer when the Lions were away. I believe that he may well have got some more game time had he not been injured. So I don't think that's a reflection on Jones. But I think that Dan Kelly might well be given a game. I think I can see him in the more of the esque of that Cameron Redpath in that game against England, Scotland 2 years ago, where Redpath didn't really do anything out of this world. He just did everything right. He distributed correctly. He ran good lines. He tackled well. He kicked well. And he basically brought the best out of Finn Russell. And I think that Dan Kelly will be that player who will bring the best out of Henry Slade. and the best out of Farrell or Smith, whoever's playing 10, because I think that's what that 12 does. It's defensively sound and bring the best out of that. And I think in the centre partnership, you often have to have one of those players who's probably less flashy, but just does the job and brings other players into the position. That said, I think at 10, I think they will go to Farrell. He is the most informed 10 at the moment, and he's playing very well. I do think it's a bit unfair because I think some ways Marcus Smith about 2 years ago, everyone was like, Marcus Smith play. He plays a very exciting brand of rugby. I think the fact that Farrell has been selected captain and the fact that I think they're likely to abandon this Farrell starting at 12 will mean that he will play. Now, it may well be the plans for bringing Smith on. Either that is for Farrell, and therefore that's why the vice-captains were emphasised quite heavily in the press conference, or where you bring Smith on and move Farrell to 12. When the games open up a little bit, having that additional distributor and leader might well help. But obviously, you can't predict how these test matches will play out. And then finally looking at 9, again, a little bit, over the years, a bit of a contentious area, and probably not an area that England have settled on, which is a shame, really. I feel like they've always had an opportunity to settle on a pairing, maybe similar to the hookers that we've had with George and Cowan-Dickie. Could have had that with scrum halves, but just not really sort of stuck with people. I think they might hopefully go with someone like Jack van Borthwick, who, to be honest, he's done a lot right since he's in his early Test career. I don't think he had the best game against New Zealand. I think he just got caught out. I think he threw that intercept pass. He then got caught at the breakdown. Those things build up, but I don't think he did anything. I think that just happens. It's just one of those days, I think. But I just genuinely think that he shows both the performance and the mentality to succeed at that level. And I fully anticipate that over his career, he will become a Lion. I think he's that good. He's that standard. So I think he's definitely England quality. And I think he would be more complemented by an experienced 9. So he'd have to go with Ben Youngs as his backup. And probably the fact that they both play together, train together, they complement each other. There's some sort of similarities between them, but there's enough differences. And plus, obviously, the experience difference is quite huge. So I think they'll go with Van Borthwick to start and Youngs. I don't think they'll swap it around like they did with Eddie Jones. I think that will be more of the play, Jack Van Borthwick, being Youngs on it later on to sort of steady the ship. That's no reflection on Alex Mitchell, who I actually quite like. I think he's a good player, but I think it's quite a brave decision, probably a bit more, and I think Borthwick's probably a bit more risk-averse to go with Jack Van Borthwick and Alex Mitchell, who are both quite not that experienced at international level. And also with the thought process that there are some other 9s, people like Rafi Quirk, who may well come into that mix later down the line. So I think that's how I think Borthwick will set up for Scotland. In terms of the substitutes bench, which I'll just cover off just for the backs, I think he'll go with a scrum half, fly half. So I think he will go with, as I mentioned, Youngs and Smith. And then looking at Borthwick's last game in charge of Leicester against Claremont, he went with Chris Ashton. So he went with that winger fullback hybrid rather than, say, a centre winger hybrid. So looking at that, I think you're probably looking at one of Malins or Freeman or Daly, depending on who plays. But I think one of those 3 will play and then be on the bench. And probably Malins might be the guy who goes to someone who, is in form as a winger, but can cover fullback, but also he could cover probably fly half if required. So they're how I think Borthwick will set up. We'll do another video on the forwards, which will be interesting because there's quite a lot of interesting choices there. So look out for the videos. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and like the videos because it sort of helps promote them. And again, thanks for your time.